Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, Boris Johnson, where's he been for the last couple of weeks? Lots of speculation early this week that he'd be out there in the front of the campaign. Then the next day we were told he was going to be sent overseas because he was too gaff-prone and could be too awkward. And overnight, he wrote an article for the Sun newspaper where he described Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, as a mutton-headed old mugwump. More of that later. And off the back of that, he was suddenly involved in a whole series of interviews. And I have to say, much to my surprise, during one of the interviews, he was asked whether Britain would be ready to join the US in a military action in Syria if a chemical attack was repeated. And Johnson said, I think it would be very difficult for us to say no. He also indicated that Theresa May might not seek MPs' approval in a parliamentary vote before British forces were deployed. He went on to speak to Nick Ferrari on LBC's Breakfast Show, and the Foreign Secretary continued to suggest that it would be very tough for us to say no if Trump asked us to get involved in a war in Syria. Here was Boris on LBC this morning.
If Assad were to do something like that again, and if there was a response that was commensurate and appropriate and timely and all the rest of it, and the US were to come to us and ask us for support and practical assistance, which they didn't do last time, as I've said, and you have to work out what the procedures would be, but I think it would be very difficult for us as a country, given our relationship with the United States. It would be difficult for us to say
with no parliamentary approval.
Well, I think you'd have to work out the systems by which you did it in a timely and
well, you won't have time. You get a phone call in the middle of the night. You know better than I, Foreign Secretary.
Well, that's you're putting your finger on the issue. But I'm giving you my perspective, my instincts, which is that if it was appropriate, if it was commensurate, and it was something that showed that the West was not going to the civilized world was not going to accept the murder of innocent people with weapons that were banned in 1925, then I think it'd be difficult for the UK to say no.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Given our relationship with the United States of America, it would be difficult for us to say no if Donald Trump launches strikes on Syria and asks us to help. I simply don't believe I'm hearing that, and I'll tell you why. Because nobody in this country has been more open and more vociferous in his support of Donald Trump during the campaign and since he became president. Doesn't mean I agree with everything Trump says or does, but I do believe that Trump is the right thing for America and the right thing for the West. But surely, Boris, surely the point about a special relationship is not when they say jump, we ask how high. The point of a special relationship is we have a conversation about the things we engage together on and the things that we don't. And it's worth reminding people, and younger listeners won't know this, but back in the 1960s, when Lyndon Johnson was the US president, and when they were gearing up more and more and more in the war in Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson said to the British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, it is your duty to send troops to Vietnam to join us in this war because of the special relationship. And Harold Wilson, I think, to his lasting credit, said no. Boris, the point of a special relationship is we can make individual decisions. So I am really startled that he should say that. And I'm even more astonished that he thinks we should do this without seeking any parliamentary approval at all. Blair is condemned over Iraq, and yet there was a parliamentary debate and vote on Iraq. Similarly with Libya, which I thought was even more crackers as a military plan, Cameron did have a debate and a vote in Parliament. And yet here's Johnson saying that the phone rings and we say, yeah, that's fine. We're going to start a bombing mission or launching missiles. I find this really very, very difficult. So my question to you this evening is Boris Johnson right to say that it would be difficult for us to say no, and should this be done without Parliament having a say. And if you think that part of the special relationship is that when they ask, we do say, how high should we jump, then call me on 0345 6060973. If you think, actually, the point of a special relationship is we make the decisions on the merits of each case, please text me on 84850. And if you think, actually, the last thing we want to be is America's poodle or Brussels poodle or anybody else, we should make our own independent decisions, and perhaps we've engaged in too many wars over the course of the last few years, then you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Plus, as ever, you can watch us on LBC's Facebook page right now. And I'm going to Yayan in Swansea as my first caller. Yayan, were you surprised by what Mr. Johnson said today?
Absolutely. Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
What are we doing thinking about getting into another foreign war?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. What the question is, what's Mr. Johnson thinking of?
Oh, it's just insane. Like, why are we even talking about it? Like, look what happened today in Westminster again. We need all our resources on our streets, not over there, not even thinking about anything to do with it.
I mean, would there be some circumstances in which you think we should go to war?
Not overseas, no.
Not what? Absolutely, full stop. Not at all.
No.
Not unless our national interest is directly threatened. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the resources. With everything that's going on here, just don't have the resources.
No, it's a very odd thing, actually. You know, you say resources, but ever since we had with Blair cutting the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and Cameron accelerating that process. And yet the more we cut our armed forces, the more we seem to want them to intervene militarily. It's very, very odd. Are you disappointed in the British government for saying this today, Jan?
I get it that she wants to look strong. I get it that she wants to show that, Britain's still, we're prepared to go to war.
Yes.
We're going to stick with Trump because he's our closest ally, but why? We've been in the Middle East for how many years? Well, I know. My whole life.
And yeah, look, I get, your comments right, that we are incredibly close allies with the Americans, and I think with the Donald in the White House, as opposed to Obama, we're a lot closer. I feel the Atlantic got smaller over the course of the last year. But for the Foreign Secretary to say, given our relationship, it would be difficult to say no, sounds a bit like he wants to be America's poodle to me.
Yeah.
Not good. Thank you very much. You're very disenchanted of Swansea there. I wonder what Peter in Maidenhead makes of Boris Johnson's comments about us going to war or getting involved with the military strikes because the Americans say we have to, without even bothering to think about seeking parliamentary consent.
Sir Nigel, hi.
Hello.
Nice to talk to you. For me, we have a track record of getting it wrong in the Middle East and invading Islamic countries without having any good game plan for what you do after the shock and awe bit. Yes. So, shock and awe in Syria, but who are we backing? Who's going to run the country afterwards?
Yes.
How do you have... how can you actually provide a purpose to what you're doing with a good outcome at the end of it? Because our track record, Blair's record in Iraq, it was simply destabilizing a region because you don't like the tyrant in charge. Cameron's intervention in Libya was destabilizing Libya because you don't like Gaddafi.
Yes.
And it goes on, and the scope for our politicians and political establishment to misread the agenda there totally is almost pristine. In terms of
Peter, my job on this show is to challenge the arguments and the questions that people like you, Peter and Maidenhead, put to me on LBC. I've got a real problem with your phone call. That is, I agree with every single word that you've just said. Regime change without any long-term strategy whatsoever. Peter, you get a star for what you've just said. And I get on Twitter, Nigel, when the USA say jump, the British response should be why, says William. And you're absolutely right. Independence for the UK should be independence from any other nation, says Spicer on Twitter, and I completely and utterly agree. There should be a coherent British military policy. Ministers should sit down for a week and work out a policy directive. And that comes, yeah, absolutely right. Again, coming on Twitter. So thus far, Boris, there are not many people supporting you. I get it's early in the show, but Mr. Johnson, if you're in your chauffeur-driven limo, heading off to the constituency to campaign or whatever it may be, Boris, call us, 0345 6060 973, and we can talk about that. We can talk about what a mugwump is. We can perhaps even talk about the £350 million a week. I would just so love if Boris was to ring this show, because I think he may well dominate the whole of the next hour. I'm going next to Yasmin in Manchester. What did you make of the Foreign Secretary's comments this morning, Yasmin?
Well, I thought they were very ill-timed with regarding talking about Syria. I also think he shouldn't do name-calling to Corbyn, especially when he looks like Jabba the Hutt. You know what I mean? He's no Adonis, is he?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
No, he's not. And I also feel that we should have a vote in Parliament before any action against Syria or any country, because at the end of the day, Boris is not a dictator. Do you know what I mean? He's got to look at everybody's views on it, unless there's something that is so drastic that happens in Syria where we need to go in. And it's immediate.
Yes.
I don't like Assad. I don't like chemical weapons being used on anybody. Assad's basically in bed with Putin, and Putin's not saying too much about Assad. But I think that's because Putin's looking to have bases over there. And basically he's letting Assad rule with his rule and do what he wants. But I think Putin is the one who's holding Assad like a puppet at the moment, but not many people can see the strings. Do you understand that?
Well, no, I do understand that, Yasmin. But whatever your reservations about Putin and Assad, it's worth remembering that on the other side, one of the big groups they're fighting against is ISIS. And there is an argument that militarily, now that Assad has got some Russian muscle, that in fact ISIS are being beat fair and square militarily in Syria, and that of itself surely can't be a bad thing.
I agree with you that ISIS as an entity should be basically obliterated from the planet. But the thing is,
well, you sound like Donald Trump now.
No, I'm just looking at it's an ideology, ISIS.
Yeah.
How do you beat an ideology with bombs? You've got to beat an ideology
Yasmin,
with ideology.
With bombs alone in one location, you cannot beat an ideology. I agree with you completely. I thank you very much for your call. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:16.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, says people don't realise what a risk Corbyn really is. The £350 million a week for the NHS that during the campaign on the side of the bus in which you posed countless times, when are we going to get that cash?
That will be available for the government of the day to spend on the priorities of this country, including the NHS. And that's what I said about N billion times.
You still support that figure?
Of course I do.
So the figure is right?
Yes, of course it's right.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, every weekday morning from 7, only on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton, now open in Aberdeen.
Are you confused about PPI? At PPI Hotline, we want to give you the facts. There is absolutely every reason to check you had PPI. Even if you think you never have, we can help you find out, as you could be owed thousands. And now there's a deadline. We just need the name of the bank you've had loans or credit cards with, and we'll check for free. So find out now if you're owed by texting WIN to 83222.
PPI Hotline. Text WIN to 83222. When you need more space.
Think creatively. What could you use a log cabin for? A studio? A home office? A den for the kids? Creative Living will design and build a log cabin to suit your needs, even taking care of electricity and climate control. See for yourself at our 3 large cabin display villages in Surrey. Find out where at creativelivingcabins.co.uk.
Your own log cabin, handcrafted, the creative living way.
Divorce. It affects every part of your life. You, your family, your home, your finances. And if you're a man facing divorce, perhaps even one you don't want, the situation becomes even more complicated. It's at times like these that you need a professional you can trust. Cordell & Cordell is dedicated to helping men in matters relating to divorce. Call now on 0330 60 60 161 or visit cordell.co.uk, office in central London. A partner men can count on.
Check warning lights. Check climate control. Check behind back seat for lost dog toy. Check shock absorbers.
A Das Welt Auto used Volkswagen has to pass 142 official checks. And the odd unofficial one too. Come to the Das Welt Auto event from 13th to 30th of April at your local Volkswagen retailer, where you can get 2 years warranty, roadside assistance, MOT insurance, replacement key cover, and 2 services included, a 10.9% APR representative. Offers on used Volkswagens aged 3 to 60 months on Solutions Personal Contract Plan. Participating retailers. Until 30th of June. Key cover until 30th of April. 18s and over. T's and C's apply. Electric models excluded. Subject to status. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Financial Services.
Let's make more of the garden. Because right now at Wickes there's 3 for 2 across gardens and landscaping, including all decking and wood care. Wickes, let's do it right. Exclusions apply.
Critics are calling Their Finest one of the best British films of the year. It's a 5-star top-notch movie.
We all have a part to play in defeating Hitler. Not this part. He's dead before the end of Act 3.
Bill Nye is brilliantly funny.
I'm awfully good.
And audiences agree.
That's the best film I've seen in a long time.
Wonderful. It was utterly charming. The finest film of the year.
Starring Gemma Arterton, Sam Claflin and Bill Nye. Their Finest. In cinemas now.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
So after a long debate about whether Boris Johnson should be sent abroad, locked in a cupboard, or put to the forefront of the Tory election campaign, overnight he comes out with a big article in The Sun where he calls Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, a mutton-headed old mugwump. And as a result of that, he gets a slew of interviews, including with Nick Ferrari on LBC's Breakfast Show, where he proceeds to tell us that it would be difficult for Britain to say no if Donald Trump asked for military assistance against President Assad in Syria, and he also indicated that we may well do this without seeking MPs' approval first. This is pretty astonishing. But it's even more astonishing when you consider where Boris has stood on these issues over the last few years. 2011, Libya. He said taking on Colonel Gaddafi is a noble cause, but the risks are huge. Only with the support of the Arab world can intervention in Libya end without disaster. Well, it ended, didn't it? Actually, in disaster. In 2013, when he was Mayor of London, he warned that it would be wrong to punish Assad for alleged chemical weapons use. He said he believed that the American politicians would back Obama in doing it, but that the UK Parliament should think again about committing British personnel to this international alliance. And then in 2013, when, if you remember, the Prime Minister and George Osborne, who is still unrepentant, wanted to arm the Syrian rebels against Assad, but finished up losing that vote, in my view, thank goodness in Parliament, Boris wrote a piece in a national newspaper saying, "Don't arm the Syria maniacs." Johnson warns that arming Syrian rebels would be disastrous, adding to tough warnings issued earlier that day from Vladimir Putin. And he says later on in 2013, the delayed attack on Syria is good for Britain and the PM. By postponing military action, MPs have done the right thing. He then in 2014 says that Tony Blair needs psychiatric help following the decision to go to war in Iraq. So Boris, through all of these conflicts has been saying exactly the same things that I've been saying, that don't go to war only as a last resort, and don't go for regime change unless you've got a long-term strategy. And then he becomes Foreign Secretary. Now, I don't know what happens to people inside the Foreign Office. I don't know what they put in the water. I've no idea what goes on, but suddenly he goes from being a dove to a sort of US neocon hawk. And I can't believe it. We are friends with the Americans. We are not servile subjects to the Americans. And anyway, I suspect that one strike that Trump did on Assad will probably be the only one anyway. Mercifully, goodness me. Have to say, I do hope I'm right about that, given what Boris has said today. Valentine in Bromley, I'm going to ask you, what do you make of what the Foreign Secretary has said?
Hi, good evening,
Good evening.
Nigel. It's the first time I'm calling into your show, and I honestly can't believe it, because I'm a staunch opponent of your politics, but
right.
On this occasion, I agree with you.
Well, there you are.
I can't believe it, but I actually do. I think that we need to review our whole relationship with the US, because in many occasions, these agreements which seem bilateral, they're just not. They're one-sided. I mean, you look at the treaties to extradite our citizens and theirs. We ratified ours; they never did theirs. So, we can't command that a citizen in the US is brought to this country, but they can. The other day, I heard that we would potentially have to check in our electronics on flights to the US. I can imagine that if that becomes formal, official, they won't have to do the same. So I feel that our relationship in general just needs a review. We need our own strategies, our own mindset. They've clearly got theirs. They're neoconservatives. They want to sort of remap and repaint the Middle East in their name. And if you look at Libya, you look at Iraq, Syria, none of this stuff has been initiated by the UK. We need to have a mindset where we use our soft power almost as a break, something that allows the US to have a second thought when they come up with these strategies and
yeah. I mean, the only good news, Valentine, the only good news for you is that Trump is not a neocon, and Trump's natural instinct is not constant military interventions and getting involved in wars without end. That's why many of us who supported Trump were actually quite surprised by that strike that we saw in Syria, but I do believe it to be a one-off. Valentine, I have to say, I have been a campaigner for independence, and it's amazed me how leading British politicians have been prepared to kowtow to Brussels and America at the same time, and I find that absolutely remarkable. Do you think what Boris... Let me ask you this question. Do you think what Boris has said could affect the Conservative lead in the polls? Because at the moment they appear to be miles ahead, and yet I can't find a single texter or tweeter or Facebook messenger or caller that think the Foreign Secretary is right.
Possibly it could, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't, just because I guess there are too many other issues which are at the forefront of people's minds, and although this is an issue of today, it will probably blow over. As long as, if there are some sort of intervention in Syria tomorrow, and then the government acted without the consent of Parliament, then that would potentially affect their polls in the future. But at this moment of time, I think there are too many issues, and this is hypothetical. Potentially it won't happen. It won't be in the front of people's minds. It might be today, but it will blow over. But ultimately, in regards to your question about the water that people... I do think that once politicians go into government, go into power, I think there's almost like an unstoppable force that kind of changes people's stances and viewpoints, and as we can see today,
well, we obviously
people like Boris.
We obviously need new people, Valentine, don't we? We obviously need new people who will influence it in the way. Listen, Valentine, I thank you for your call, and I have to say, as a sworn opponent of me, you were incredibly polite. Messages piling in everywhere. On Facebook, Nicholas says, Assad is fighting ISIS. Let him do his work and keep borders strong to keep ISIS out of Europe. John says, wipe ISIS from the face of the earth. Leave Assad alone. Anthony says, I don't like Assad or chemical weapons, but just leave it alone. Nick says, all nations should act in the best interests of their citizens, avoiding war unless they are attacked or threatened by an aggressor. International cooperation should be focused on free trade. I've yet to find anyone supporting Boris Johnson, which is why I'm very keen to get Boris or big Conservatives. Come on, Conservative supporters, tell me that you've got the right man as Foreign Secretary, that he's now going to be at the front of your general election campaign and lead you to storming victory. Tricia, on the Wirral, what do you think?
I think he's an idiot.
Right, OK. Go on.
I support everything you've said. I've supported you right through Brexit. Everything. I think you're a wonderful person. You'll have to excuse me, it is my first time on.
Well, welcome.
I am a Conservative.
Yep.
I think he's an idiot. I really do. I mean, talk about giving more votes to Labour by what he's done.
Well, it's interesting, Tricia, because, you're calling from one of those parts of the country where Labour hold the lion's share of the seats and where the Conservatives, and what the pollsters have been saying over the last week, where the Conservatives are likely to start picking up a lot of seats. Do you sense, Tricia, in parts of the North West like the Wirral, that what Johnson has said could really hurt?
Yes, I think so. Esther McVeigh, she was our MP in, she was the people we voted for in Hoylake, and Labour, they made sure that they got rid of her. She was, she's really good, and I believe she's going to be taking...
She's just been selected for Tasson, which is a very safe Conservative seat, so it's been a good day, I think, in many ways, for Esther McVeigh.
She's from Liverpool,
I know, I've met her many times, and she's great fun. She's great. But Tricia, tell me, have you previously been a Boris supporter?
When he was mayor, yes.
When he was mayor, yes.
He was a very good supporter.
So, OK, put yourself, Tricia, in the position. You're now having a cup of tea, or perhaps something stronger, in number 10. You've seen the response to what Boris did this morning. Your name is Theresa May. You're the Prime Minister. You're 22 points ahead in the polls. What would you do with Boris for the next 6 weeks?
I would sack him now.
Would you really?
Yes, I would. Because what he's done, he's not helped the Conservatives, at all.
Well, Tricia, I have to say, for somebody who said they were a nervous first-time caller, that was pretty tough talking from the Wirral, and I thank you very much indeed for the call. So, is Mr Johnson right to support the Americans without parliamentary approval, saying we can't say no if Trump asks us to join in military action against Assad? Your chance to have your say. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30, and time for the news with Rupert Bartier.
A man's been detained at gunpoint in central London on suspicion of planning a terror attack. He was stopped by armed police on Whitehall. Witnesses say he was carrying a bag of knives. The UKIP leader Paul Nuttall has told LBC he will be standing in June's election. He says the seat he's targeting will be confirmed this week. And campaigners say that Royal Marine Alexander Blackman, who shot and killed an injured Taliban fighter in Afghanistan, will be released from prison tomorrow. His murder conviction was downgraded to manslaughter last month. LBC weather. Any rain mostly clearing into the evening, a low of 6 Celsius overnight. Tomorrow, largely dry with sunny spells in the morning, the odd shower possible later on, a high of 15 degrees.
LBC Travel. Good evening. I'm Andy Lake. Well, starting off in London, it looks like the A41 Edgware Way is closed eastbound between Broadfields Avenue and Mount Grove for a police investigation. Delays there already back to the A410 Spur Road at Cannons Corner. In Surrey, the A3 is slow most of the way from the M25 to Guildford after a breakdown at the Hogs Back earlier on, although all lanes are back open now. It's also created chaos in Guildford. The town centre there absolutely gridlocked. In central London, Regent Street is closed northbound heading towards Oxford Circus, a water main burst between Maddox Street and Hanover Street yesterday. Into Swansea now, the M4 is crawling westbound through the works at junction 47, delays there back to the A48 at junction 46. And in the West Midlands, the M42 is slow southbound between junction 4 for the A34 and junction 3A for the M40. That's after a collision earlier. All lanes are back open there, though. For more real-time traffic updates, go to lbc.co.uk.
This is LBC.
Oh, the garden's an absolute mess. It's my turn to have the cross-stitch crew round for tea and Battenberg. I'll have to get a landscape gardener in and a wildlife expert. It's a jungle out there. We could be eaten alive by those deadly flutterbugs. Oh, relax, relax. It's Trust a Trader. Marvellous local tradespeople who've been tried, tested and reviewed. All specialists in their areas, from landscape gardening to pest control. Oh, visit trustatrader.com.
Trustatrader.com. Here at the Claims Guys, we'd like to offer this assurance to anyone worried by the deadline on PPI claims. There is still time to make your claim. Our experts will work fast to discover if you were ever sold PPI. And once we've completed your free PPI check, you can then pursue your own claim or let us do it for you. It's your choice. Even if you can't find any paperwork, just text the word EASY to 60777 and let the Claims Guys do the rest. Text EASY to 60777 now.
The Claims Guys.
eBay has every kind of car part for everyone from beginners to the real experts.
Well, that should stop them squeaking.
Brake pads.
And that's the engine sorted.
Motor oil.
And that's the handling taken care of.
Alloys and tyres.
And that means I've saved myself a few quid.
12-foot snooker table for the spare room. Shop eBay's unbeatable selection of car parts and accessories. The ultimate fix the car like a hero shop.
It's how London buys its cars. Car Giant.
Make the most of the bank holiday at Car Giant. We make car buying easy and hassle-free, with up to 10,000 cars in stock all in one location. Find the car that's right for you and drive it home the very same day. Car Giant, open all bank holiday weekend with giant choice and giant savings. Book your test drive at cargiant.co.uk.
It's how London buys its cars. Car Giant.
Divorce. It threatens the things you've worked hard for in more ways than you can imagine. Your home, savings, pension, and most of all, your relationship with your children. Don't let divorce cost you any more than it has to. Cordell & Cordell is dedicated to helping men in matters relating to divorce. Call now on 0330 60 60 161 or visit cordellcordell.co.uk. Office in central London. A partner men can count on.
Leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
It's Thursday night on LBC and it's Boris night. Because the day started with Boris with a big article in The Sun calling Jeremy Corbyn a mutton-headed old mugwump. And then he went on various radio shows, including Nick Ferrari's LBC Breakfast Show, to say that if the Americans called on us to act militarily in Syria, it would be virtually impossible for us to say no, and that we should contemplate doing this without first seeking parliamentary approval. And I'm asking you tonight what you think about that. But there's a third factor with Boris today that we have to get to, because the Foreign Secretary also told Nick Ferrari this morning that he still supports his claim that £350 million a week could be spent on the National Health Service after Brexit. That figure has been widely disputed during and since the referendum campaign. But speaking to Nick Ferrari today, Boris Johnson says we'll take back control of the money once we've left the European Union. Let's hear him.
What it represents is the total sum that we do not control every week that is spent by Brussels. And it's either spent by Brussels in this country or it's squitted away somewhere in some other European country.
So you still support that figure?
Of course I do.
During the referendum, I was asked repeatedly about this figure, and I never once supported it, but perhaps during the campaign, openly condemned it. And my view on that was that when you've got your army and you're facing their army, what you don't do is shoot your own side in the back, given the significance of what we were facing. But Boris, I'm sorry, It's wrong. You know, that coach that he went round the country on said we send £350 million a week to the European Union. We don't. Because that's the gross figure before the rebate. We don't send that much. Yeah, sure, we send over 250 million a week. And net, even when we get bits back, because the European Union do give us money. You know, rich landowners do very well out of the European Union. There's bits of regional money, etc. But net, it's £200 million a week. Had he just used that net figure, that would have been big enough to convince voters that actually we were wasting an awful lot of money. So I think, you know, frankly, Boris, all round, it's been a pretty rotten day. And can I just say to listeners, and I've had some phone calls last week with my opponents ringing in. And by the way, all opponents are welcome to ring in. If you think you're hard enough, come and have a go. Now, you're all welcome. You know, this is about having a proper open forum debate and chat on these issues. But those callers last week who said to me, Nigel, you said the NHS would get £350 million a week. And I said, no, I didn't. Oh, yes, you did. Oh, no, I didn't. And I finished up by saying urban myth. Please, can I never have any more calls accusing me of using that figure? I actually begged Michael Gove face to face, and I spoke to Boris on the phone and told them, drop the number because it's not factually accurate. So, Boris, we are really having a bit of a pop at you tonight. Please ring in. Tell me where I've got all this wrong. Boris, it's 0345 6060 973. Back to our main debate. The Foreign Secretary saying, if we're asked to jump by the Americans in terms of military intervention in Syria, we will ask the question, how high? And so far, absolutely nobody has supported the Foreign Secretary. We've even had a Tory voter saying she thought up in the northwest it might damage their prospect of winning some seats. Rob in Sutton, what do you think?
It's still waffle again. He's been put up to do it, and he like the Brexit. I don't think he'll damage anything. Most people know he waffles on.
Right.
He backtracks over the 350 million. If you listen to what he really said now, Nigel, it's now, the government's got the right to use it or can use it. Some can go on the national health. He's very clever the way he words things, Nigel, very clever. But I think they put him up front. Corbyn saying he won't fire a bullet or do anything, so, you know, he's taking a chance. So I think they put Boris up front to rally the troops. I was listening to LBC not long ago, and they said there was a couple of politicians actually said they wish they'd done something in Syria when they voted not to.
Well, that was George Osborne, wasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, really, this is just a game of chess, and that they're putting things up that I don't think they'll lose anyone. Anyone with half a cent will really know that Corbyn hasn't got a chance to run this country.
Well, that, Rob, that Rob, may well be true. That may well be true. But let me ask you, I mean, there's no question that when Boris said he was going to back the out campaign in the referendum, that made a critical difference. He was a very, very important figure, particularly in a country where these days there are very few recognisable politicians. That's because most of them are so bland and dull. But, Rob, do you honestly think, given today is Boris's first big intervention in a general election campaign, do you honestly think he's an asset to Theresa May over the next 6 weeks?
I really do. Yes, I do. I think he's just an attention. He brings attention to people. People are not listening, one way or the other, Nigel. But he might get his hand slapped by Theresa May. It could be all put up front to say, you know, then he gets his hand slapped where you can't say this, and they think, oh, she is a strong Prime Minister. She's give Boris a slap on the hand for step. Do you see what I mean,
So
Nigel?
it's all a clever game. Open up the doors to the sweet shop, let Boris in, and then tell him off for eating too many. Is that what you think?
You've got it. You've got it.
Right, OK.
All right, Nigel.
Well, Rob from Sutton, that's a very cunning plan, and I thank you very much for the call. Messages still pouring in. It shouldn't matter how close we are to Trump. We should respect our democratic way of doing things, says Robert in Pembrokeshire, implying that we should have a vote in Parliament before taking military action if possible. Nigel, no, I don't think we should get involved in any war alongside America. I reckon that Parliament should have a say in that situation. Kathy in Southampton, I'm sick and tired of the US meddling with the Middle East. We need to put the great back into Britain and to do the right thing. Stay out of Syria. MPs must have a a vote if we're going to go wasting money on a stupid proxy war, says Max. Tweet, Bojo needs to understand that a nation should always place the interests of its own people above an alliance. Here is what I have to say. Alex in Loughborough, tell me, have I got this all wrong? I mean, is Johnson's intervention today a dramatically good thing for the Conservative Party? And is it right that we slavishly follow America on any foreign policy issue?
Hi, Nigel. First, I'd just like to say you're a national hero. Thank you for everything you've done.
Well, that's very sweet of you.
I think it's very interesting politically because I think it won't make a difference in the sort of between Labour and the Conservatives. But where I think it will make a difference is at the margins.
Yeah.
And one of those areas is UKIP.
Yeah.
I think you'll see. I do think you'll see a migration of UKIP voters to the Conservatives because of what they're offering on Brexit. Now, I know you may not think that, but I think a lot of people will that were voting UKIP vote Conservatives. However, this will worry a lot of UKIP voters who have heard over the last few years UKIP proposing a very much more isolationist foreign policy. Perhaps you might not like the term, but...
Well, I would say, Alex, I mean, I was leader for that period, and I would never describe what I stood for as being isolationist, but I would describe it as being non-interventionist unless absolutely necessary.
Okay, in that case, non-interventionist, whereas this, certainly the language that he used was very much the language of, the poodle connotations, the bowing down connotations. And I think a lot of UKIP voters will not like that.
No.
And I think this will stem the tide. This could. I don't think it's going to have a massive effect, but I think it could stem the tide of UKIP voters to the Conservatives. But, like I say, I don't think it's that big a deal. And one thing you've got to remember with Boris Johnson is this is a guy who has very seldom failed electorally. And I think there may be a bigger play here, as your previous caller said. But,
yes.
I don't know.
I mean, as a personality, he's a huge personality. He is instantly recognisable. Everyone knows who he is. And what he also does, he brings fun to politics. And any photograph you see of Boris on a street, in a cafe, wherever it is, there are people laughing and joking. And as I say, politics needs that, because without characters, it's just the bland leading the bland. And Boris is very good at that. Alex, a very interesting perspective. Caroline says on Facebook, I think Bojo knows that MPs won't vote for us to bomb Syria. Is that why you think he'll swerve Parliament this time? Well, it'd be a very brave government that deliberately swerved Parliament and involved themselves in a war thinking they might lose the vote. I love this. I love this text. Nigel, is Boris giving us tomorrow's news today? Regards, John. I like that. And on Twitter I get, remember, Boris is still a US citizen. Is that right? I thought he'd finally renounced that citizenship. I think that may be now in the past tense. After invading Syria, we would need to run the place. The problem is most of the infrastructure has been destroyed. Good luck. Well, lots of views. Very, very few people suggesting that Boris has done the right thing, other than one caller who thinks it's all part of a cunning plan, that Boris goes out and is really naughty and then gets slapped down by Theresa May, showing what a strong leader she is. By the way, I've just had it confirmed that Boris Johnson has, I was right, he has turned in, given up, renounced his US passport. Right now, you're listening to a Nigel Farage show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
So Boris Johnson stands by that now infamous $350 million a week NHS claim. But does anyone seriously think it'll happen?
Clive Bull on LBC.
What do you think of when someone says the word used? Old-fashioned? Out of tune? A bit scratched? Something past its best. Chances are you're not thinking of a Mercedes-Benz. And certainly not one of the latest models. Think Mercedes-Benz approved used. Suddenly, there's a lot more meaning to that little word. Visit your local retailer to find your used car today, and you'll see what I mean.
I like the way you work it.
Mercedes-Benz approved used. Used, but not what you're used to.
Here at the Claims Guys, we'd like to offer this assurance to anyone worried by the deadline on PPI claims. There is still time to make your claim. Our experts will work fast to discover if you were ever sold PPI. And once we've completed your free PPI check, you can then pursue your own claim or let us do it for you. It's your choice. Even if you can't find any paperwork, just text the word EASY to 60777 and let the Claims Guys do the rest. Text EASY to 60777 now.
The Claims Guys.
Selling is just as easy as buying on eBay.
Oh, Liz, you're such a hoarder. There's so much stuff in this wardrobe, some have even got new tags. I mean, when was the last time you fitted into these?
Leather trousers.
Look at the heels on those.
Vintage platform shoes.
And how many of these do you need?
Designer handbags.
And what is this?
Dazzling disco jumpsuits. With millions of buyers ready and waiting, there's no better place for you to sell than eBay. The ultimate way to streamline your wardrobe shop.
No one wants to be in the red, in debt, or facing mortgage arrears. The only red should be what's in your glass, toasting a fresh new start. Thanks to Property Rescue, you can. They could buy your home for cash and pay your legal fees. You could even exchange within 48 hours and have money in the bank if you opt for their cash advance. Get that just sold feeling with Property Rescue. Fast forward to cash in the bank at propertyrescue.co.uk.
Let's make more of the garden, because right now at Wix there's 3 for 2 across gardens and landscaping, including all decking and wood care. Wix, let's do it right. Exclusions apply.
It's how London buys its cars. Car Giant.
Make the most of the bank holiday at Car Giant. We make car buying easy and hassle-free, with up to 10,000 cars in stock all in one location. Find the car that's right for you and drive it home the very same day. Car Giant, open all bank holiday weekend with giant choice and giant savings. Book your test drive at cargiant.co.uk.
It's how London buys its cars. Car Giant.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC, The Nigel Farage Show.
Boris hits the general election. He writes overnight that the leader of the opposition is a mutton-headed old mugwump. I wonder how many of you know what that actually means. And then he goes on to tell Nick Ferrari and others that it would be very difficult to say no if the Americans asked us to join them in a military intervention against Assad if he's seen to have behaved badly again, and that we should contemplate doing that without asking parliamentary approval. And I am shocked and staggered by this, particularly given everything he said, going back through Libya in 2011, through the attempt by the British government to, as Boris himself said, arm the Syria maniacs in 2013, through to saying that Tony Blair needed psychiatric help following his claims over the Iraq war. And suddenly he gets into the Foreign Office, they've slipped something in his tea, and he's become a gung-ho neocon that wants us to go to war. I can't believe it, and I do think, that it will do some damage to the Conservatives' campaign. That's my view. I wonder what Sarah in Southend makes of all of this.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you ever so much for taking the call. Big fan. Not of your party, but definitely a big fan of you.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Well, actually, the UKIP, I know this is not the subject, but the UKIP party political broadcast I saw this evening for the council elections has persuaded me to vote UKIP, and I've been a Conservative all my life. I just think it was a wonderful message. Nothing, forgetting all about the immigration
I can't really comment on that, Sarah, but I am going to ask you specifically, is Johnson right to say that we should intervene if Trump asks us to, without asking Parliament?
I think he's brilliant, Nigel, because he's a bumbler. He speaks honestly because he's not pre-prepared. And to say he's an idiot, this, like you already mentioned, this guy very rarely loses. So he's got to be a clever idiot, put it that way.
Sarah, I have never ever called him an idiot, and I find him face to face enormously likeable and personable. And listen, without him, we would not have won that referendum campaign. Of that, I've got no doubt, absolutely no doubt at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So he's a very important figure. The bit, Sarah, that gets me is when I read out at 7:15 all his different quotes on not intervening militarily because it perhaps could make things worse rather than better, and suddenly he's Foreign Secretary and he's quite happy for us to go around bombing people. What's gone on, Sarah?
How about, we learn by our mistakes and maybe not interfering in the past. We've learned that the world should interfere in Syria. The world should, but we shouldn't, as a world, be not allowing genocide and dictatorships like they are. And we've done talking. We've talked for years. We've put sanctions on them. It doesn't stop them. No way would Russia fight America. The rest of we're very fortunate that the Chinese hate the Russians, and that's on their doorstep.
Let me ask you, Sarah. Sarah, let me ask you. We intervened in Iraq. Do you believe that's better now than it was?
Who could predict ISIS and what was going to happen?
Hang on, Sarah. Didn't we, in effect, with Iraq, open the door for ISIS?
Probably, yeah.
Right.
Probably, I would have to agree with that.
And let me ask you a second question, Sarah. Is Libya a better place than before Cameron and Sarkozy?
No, because there's no infrastructure. It's the same as the Israeli and Palestine. You're looking at deep-rooted hatred between religious faiths.
So shouldn't we, Sarah, just be a little bit careful before we get involved with any military action, with any attempt to overthrow a dictator, however appalling and vile many of the things that he says and does are? Shouldn't we just think about it a little bit and perhaps, and this is what I'm going to say, Sarah, and you're a big Boris fan, and actually so am I in many ways, but wouldn't it be better for these debates to be thrashed out openly in Parliament, on the floor of the House of Commons, and for all of us to listen and to think and to get involved?
If the time factors was days as opposed to weeks, months and years, I would say yes, of course. But at the end of the day, when people are being chemically killed, going through insufferable pain, how much more talking do you want to do?
Well,
another couple of months of talking to have a vote, whether we do, whether we don't.
But what we could do, Sarah...
How many more people have got to be killed in between that, Nigel?
Sarah, listen, I understand that, and that emotion that you've just expressed is actually the same emotion that Donald J. Trump expressed. He was horrified by those images. He believed the intelligence that he was given, rightly or wrongly, but he believed the intelligence he was given, that it was beyond disputable doubt that the Assad regime had done it, and that is why he intervened in the way that he did. And you're expressing that emotion, Sarah, and it's one that a lot of people feel, and I get that. My point is that there's nothing new about chemical weapons being used by both sides in this Syrian conflict, and that actually maybe the first week after the general election, Parliament should discuss in principle whether, if it thinks it's got the evidence, we should be prepared to intervene. But
I totally agree with that. But when you get an attack like that happened, we have to show we're not going to tolerate it. We're not going to talk about it. We've talked about it. We've tried to see reason. You can't reason with the unreasonable. Now, since Trump has sent all his, Navy and whatever to North Korea, I heard on the news this evening that the leader of North Korea will probably end up talking to Trump. But that's after years of sanctions.
No, Sarah, don't misunderstand me. I'm not a pacifist. I've never been a pacifist. I've never been an isolationist. I've never said we should never intervene militarily. And what Trump wants to do is to show the world that America is strong and that America won't back down. And Sarah, the big mistake that Obama made was he set a red line. He said, if chemical weapons are seen to be used by the Assad regime, we will intervene militarily. Then he didn't do it. Sarah, listen, fascinating conversation. Thank you for your call. I'm going to Derry in Wigan. Derry, has Boris got this right?
He absolutely has, Nigel. I agree with you on almost everything except for this.
Okay.
I listened this morning on Nick's show where he talked about all this. And he was very specific. He wasn't talking about boots on the ground. He wasn't talking about going to war with Syria. If that was the case, then yes, obviously a parliamentary vote and getting everybody on board is fine. What he was talking about is exactly what Donald Trump did. So if something was to go off in the middle of the night, our time, and that happened, then we have to react straight away. We can't have it where something happens 9 to 5, Monday to Friday when Parliament's in. So we have to be able to react to something going on if we had concrete information that, for example, a chemical or weapons attack was going to happen.
But Derry,
we're not going to do it.
Derry, if we send missiles, be they from submarines or bombs from aeroplanes, that is not without consequence, is it?
No, of course it's not. But it's not about going to war. This is what seems to have been reacting to everybody. Nobody wants to go to war, and that is fine.
But it would be Derry, hang on, mate.
Yeah.
It would be an act of war, wouldn't it?
Yes, I agree with that. But we've got to stand up now. We can't. Everybody knows in the world that people will talk, and NATO and us, and even America, and this is why people will still try and get away with stuff. So like North Korea are doing now as well. If you decide and set out, well, we won't do anything, regardless what happens, you can do anything you want, and we will not react, then that surely can't be the right way to do things.
Derry, there's a right and a wrong way of doing things. As I said, and I've said before tonight to many, many people, I do believe there are times when you should intervene militarily, but I think to get involved in something that is part of, and we did even hear from elements of the Trump administration after the strike that regime change was desirable. To get involved, Derry, militarily in any way with regime change without a long-term strategy is, I think, a policy of failure. Derry, I thank you. I thank all of you for your calls, texts and tweets this week. And my final thought has to be, and by the way, a mugwump. Now, this was out of a Roald Dahl book. And it's somebody who is seen as aloof or independent, especially politically, and that is how Boris sees Jeremy Corbyn. All I can say is this. Boris, you're the mugwump of the day, not Jeremy Corbyn. What you've said, I think, is reviled by most people in this country. We've had enough of foreign wars, and certainly Parliament should have a say first. That's my view. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back on Bank Holiday Monday from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next...